Hey guys, Autorod here, bringing to you some more serious social matters. Now, the meat of what I'm about to discuss comes from an article for which the link's in the description. Now, please feel free to peruse, but to give the bare bones, an 87-year-old woman died recently after having passed out with little to no signs of breathing in the Glenwood Gardens, a senior living facility she resided in. A tragedy, but what makes it cross into incredulous, if not infuriating, is the events immediately following her passing out. Now, the Glenwood Gardens staff called 911 first thing quick as a whip. The emergency dispatcher was then equally quick to send a response team. However, believing that the resident's life was put in jeopardy for every moment that she wasn't able to breathe properly, the emergency dispatcher instructed the nurse who had called 911 to perform immediate CPR on the resident. The nurse refused. You see, evidently performing CPR on a resident in the Glenwood Gardens runs contrary to established policy maintained by the Glenwood Gardens administrative staff. Now, this policy evidentially is to call emergency services and wait for emergency personnel to arrive. Apparently, all they're allowed to do is wait. Now, let me make it clear that according to the sources that provided this story, the elderly woman in question did not have a do-not-resuscitate order, which presumably means that this policy would apply to any and all residents in the Glenwood Gardens. Now, plenty have focused their ire on the nurse in question, and there's plenty I could say about her decision, but, well, I'd rather focus on the policy that largely motivated her inaction. Now, let's face it, the very concept of anything that involves personal liability, such as a Good Samaritan law, and can be tangly at the very best at times, and laws protecting Good Samaritan acts could arguably be supported or opposed on different grounds. For example, I used to work at a food concession stand when I was younger, and after each shift, there would be a truly ridiculous amount of food left over. Usually 24 hot dogs, half a dozen slices of pizza, etc., etc. We were supposed to basically throw most of it out, although we were allowed to take leftovers home for our own use. But when a colleague of mine asked whether or not we could take the food to a collection of homeless people that we knew elsewhere in town, we were told that we couldn't, because if we gave them the food and after eating it they were to become ill for whatever reason, there would be no legal protection to keep this company from getting sued by those in question. I mean, ridiculous, right? That there isn't any law to prevent such legal action being taken? Well, not if you consider that, unfortunately, there are those out there who would take advantage of such laws, deliberately providing tainted food, or simply not bothering to take the slightest precautions in ensuring the safety of what they offer. From a person who doesn't know how long a turkey should cook to eliminate salmonella, to some sicko getting his kicks, to some depraved form of human experimentation by a less than legal-minded corporation. This might all sound like a terribly paranoid thing, but God only knows worse has happened. People have committed atrocities, whether for profit or the really disgusting enjoyment. And the very sickest of them often know just how to use the law in their favor. If provided guaranteed protection against negligence, or even outright malice, well, it can sometimes be hard to draw the line between some honest, well-meaning idiot who just made a mistake while trying to help, and some sick bastard who's all too good at knowing how far he can push things. Now, in my situation, we knew the food was alright. It was fresh when we had it. We'd been on a steady diet of it for the past 2 months, and we were willing to take the personal risk. So we sort of snuck the food out and gave it to the homeless people anyway. Nobody got sick, nobody got sued, happy, happy days. But I do admit, it could just as easily have gone the other way, which is why the corporation that I was working for didn't want to personally involve itself in the efforts. So, regular Good Samaritan laws aren't exactly black and white, and CPR can even be dangerous if not performed properly, which might have left the home legally liable. Does this therefore excuse the policy undertaken by this senior living facility? Hell no! Not in the slightest. Look, they called 911 for assistance when this medical emergency occurred. It was the dispatcher of said emergency hotline who instructed the nurse to perform CPR in the first place, while emergency personnel were en route. Now, in a situation where an emergency dispatcher is involved, their instructions should supersede any other considerations, especially when the instruction is basic common sense. Resident can't breathe? Help her breathe. And for that matter, as I said, CPR is dangerous if not performed properly. But if the staff isn't trained to perform CPR properly, they should get new staff. Dispatchers are trained to handle these situations, but what they are not trained in is magic. If the individuals on the other end refuse to cooperate, then an emergency response team's effectiveness is considerably hampered. Do not call 911 and then start balking when it turns out they're not magically going to materialize and take the problem out of your hands for you. Hell, not even that. They were balking because the response team wasn't going to materialize fast enough. You know, maybe intervening with CPR wouldn't have helped. And I can't really tell anyone to put their job on the line by going against, God help us, corporate policy. Now, I've never been in that sort of situation, won't even pretend to know what's going through someone's mind during it. It's the policy above all else that needs to be examined, turning it into a simple question. When does propriety and legal convenience become an impediment to basic morality and decency? Well, I think it's when an emergency operator is forced to beg the nurse on the other end of the line to find some random onlooker who doesn't work for the senior living facility to please come and try to save this potentially dying woman's life. And I find it absurd how frequently death and pain seem to ride coattails with people who are just following policy or following orders. Now, maybe I'm harsh, but if someone I loved died because the person who could have helped them did not, all because of some policy, that's just beyond forgiveness. Anyone who is looking into putting a relative into one of these assisted living facilities, I encourage you to ask about their policies on such matters. Then ask your loved one if they want to live in that kind of place. This is Arterot. Little disgusted.